Okay, let's take a look at the interface a little bit. I'm not going to go into, very specific into each of the tools. I just want you to know where they are and where things are located within Adobe Photoshop. Okay, so normally you'll see this in pretty much all software. You'll have a menu at the top. Now we'll have our Photoshop, and this is where we have our preferences. We'll have our file where we'll be able to open up new documents, create new documents, open up documents, and save out documents. We have our edit, image, and this is where we can adjust a little bit of our image size, and we have some of our adjustment layers here, and as well as our mode. Here we'll have our layers, and this will pretty much a whole menu is dedicated just to this layer palette over here. We have the same thing for type, since these are going to be the things that you're going to be using pretty much all the time within Photoshop. You're going to be using the image, layer, type, and select, and maybe some filters, depending on what you're trying to do. This is a little bit more focused on design, but you are going to be using some filters that I use often, and most designers will use often. And then 3D, which isn't really applicable to this course. And then you have our view, which we went over a little bit briefly in our quick start. But we'll have everything that will be set up in here as well. You'll be using Snap as well, and a lot of the show. So you'll see like maybe hide your grid or layer slices, pixel grids, stuff like that. And then we'll have our window. And now window is going to be all the little palettes that you might use that is a little bit more specific to a particular tool or a particular function within Adobe Photoshop. And, we'll go into these a little bit more. Some of them are useful. Some of them just, you kind of use them once in a while sparingly, but you don't use them all the time. So there's no need to have all of these open. And then we have our help system within Adobe. Now over here on the side, you're going to have tools that you're going to be using quite often, such as your brush. You're going to be using your brush pretty much all the time if you're going to be painting something out, or if you're going to be masking something. Brushes are going to be something that you'll be using a lot. And you also have the brush over here as well. Now, next we'll be using clone. Clone is also something you use a lot. Now, this is, if you're going to be doing designing for like the web or graphic design, there are going to be times where you're going to need to do something within like an image, such as this one here. You want to clone something out that you don't like, or a photograph. And then next we'll have our typography, or our type, excuse me. And then we'll have our character and paragraph palettes. That's the same thing here. If you just click on this one, this icon, it'll give you a paragraph, and then, for alignment and leading and tracking and that type of thing. And then we'll also have our tool presets and then our libraries, which is also helpful, especially if you're using something, if you're doing like a whole set of, say, emails or banners or something like that, and you want to change this. You have like a logo that you want to keep in. You have certain colors that you want to use. It's also very, very useful. Okay, so next over here we have our palettes for, say, our layer. I also have open paths, which I use quite often. History palette, which is also very useful, and I'll kind of go over that a little bit. Channels, so we have our different RGB. If we want to just focus in on a specific color, we can do that as well. And then our properties, which gives you an idea of how big something is if you have a selection, and you can see how big that selection is. So I actually have this selected to fixed size. Just go back to normal. And so let me go over to our layers palette. And I'm going to go over this very specifically, but this is something that you're probably going to have open almost all the time. And we'll go through this every little section of this in greater detail. Now up here you'll have some more important tools that you're going to be using. One of them is auto select. So right now I just have one layer, but if I add in another layer, and let me just quickly add in, let me choose a different color. And I'm just going to add in this color to this layer. Now, if I have an image, say this background image, and I'm just gonna remove that lock. So this image I can move around freely, and this graphic I can move around freely as well. But say I'm on this layer and I want to select this little block here, this orange square. So you can use the move tool to click and select this object. But you'll notice in my layer palette, it jumps to the selection of this image. The reason why that happens is because you have auto select checked. If I don't have auto select checked and I click on this orange box with this image selected and I click and drag, you can see I'm not moving this orange. Even though I'm clicking on this square, this orange square, I'm just only moving this background image, the photograph. So that's something that you're going to be using. You're going to be toggling back and forth between this, often, because sometimes you might want to just move a whole folder, and I can do that here. If I click on this icon, I can get a folder, and I can just move this image, this cube, this this square into this folder. And I just want to move this group. Maybe I have a bunch of other different layers in here as well that I just want to move those layers. What you do, you want to just have this selected, this folder selected, and then you can move this and everything else within this folder around. So just keep that in mind as you're using these tools, and I'm going to go into layers a little bit more. So that's your move tool. You also have your selection tool. You also have various other tools here for selecting. You'll have your wand. You'll have slices, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. And you have all the tools that you're going to be needing to manipulate, adjust, or change objects within Photoshop, whether it be something like a vector type, smart object. Like if I make this rectangle is a little bit different than this cube here, because what we can then do is select these points and then move these around to change our shape. You can't do that with this particular object. Let me go back to my layers. If I go to this object, I can't do that. So that's a little bit different. Then we have our pen tool, we have our type tool, we have individual selection we have our path, or we have direct selection, and then we went over our hand and our magnifying glass. So under here, we're going to have these two colors. We have our foreground color and we have our background color. And then we have these two icons here. So you notice that I filled in this color into this selection here, this square. But we also have our background. Now we can change this color. If I just click on this color, just simple click, and then you can change this color by using this color picker dialog box. And you can just move this around here and find the color that you want. Now you also have this slider that gives you a grade of different colors within this color library, and you can choose, either purple. You can choose all the spectrum of colors that you have here. And then we also have a lot of these coordinates that you can change depending if you're using HSB, RGB, CMYK. So we have different sections for that as well. Also, we have a hexadecimal coordinate number system here as well, and that's more for web. And so what you can then do is switch between these background and foreground colors. And say if I choose a different color here, and I had green, so let's try blue. And we can just switch these by using this icon here. And then if you want to go back to your default black and white, you can click on this icon here and it goes back to its black and white default. And then we have our quick mask down here as well. So that just kind of gives you an overview of this interface, and it's definitely useful, and you're going to be using, this whole the whole interface as you're working. There isn't going to be a time where you're not going to be using any of these little sections. So it's an idea to get a good understanding of where these things are. So in the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to start getting into selecting within our image.